and are really answering the question, what is life asking of you? What is life asking of you today? So one of my great teachers, Angelis Ariane, she offers a guideline for self-leadership that I have found very, very useful in my own personal life, and people I work with in my private counseling practice. Probably everybody gets this at some point along the line. But there's some very valuable guidelines. It's a 5-step process. And the first step is to show up. You got to show up, right? If we're busy kind of avoiding and hiding, that's really not going to help us to get to where we want to go. So showing up. Second step is being present. Being present. So once you show up, then you kind of check in using mindfulness, checking in with the breath perhaps as a way of showing up and being present. And another way of being present is the third step, and that is following your sense of what has heart and meaning. So showing up, being present to what has heart and meaning. So you feel that in your body. You feel that what has heart, that occurs in your body. You can feel it in your heart, you feel it in your gut, you get that directional that helps you along the way. But notice that it also says what has heart and meaning. So our minds put interpretations, our minds create meaning for what it is that we're feeling. And we can pay attention to when those two are aligned and we're in integrity. And when that happens, it's easy for us to take the next step, which is to speak your truth without blame or judgment. So when my heart and my head are aligned, when my thoughts and my thinking are the same thing as what I'm feeling in my body, it's easy for me to just say what's happening and to speak my truth without blaming anyone else or blaming myself, without creating a judgment against someone else or creating guilt, coming from a place of guilt or from myself. So show up, be present, pay attention to what has heart and meaning, and speak your truth without blame or judgment. That's 4, and I promised you 5. And the 5th one is to hold the outcome of whatever it is that you're going towards. Hold that outcome loosely, rather than holding on to it and being really rigid about where it is that I want to go. Because if I'm doing that, then when I show up and I'm present, I might be so focused on where I want to go that I'm not really where I am right now. And I might be holding on to that goal, and everything else in between that goal and me is going to be irrelevant. I might run some people over. I might not pay attention to my own values. I'll be so stuck on where I think that I want to go that I won't be paying attention to what's happening right now. I sure do want to have goals and ideas about where I want to go, and so I can manifest things that are important in my life. But if I'm holding on too tightly to what those are, I might miss some of those important signals along the way that's saying, well, wait a minute, this maybe needs a little fine-tuning, or maybe I need to take a really sharp left turn here. And that's when we get in trouble, is when we're not paying attention, when we're so focused somewhere else that we're missing the subtle signals. And so the signals that we are hearing have to become big signals, or we have to get hit with something really major in our life that says, whoa, wait a minute, this is really off track. And those kinds of signals aren't always painless. They're useful, and we bless and honor all of those things that come into our lives as important and as messages. So those are the 5 steps. Let me go over them again from the great teacher who has passed just recently last year, Angelis Ariane. She wrote the book, The Fourfold Way, the path of the visionary, the teacher, the healer, and the warrior. And these principles are kind of tied into each of those archetypes. So I'm here sitting with someone who has followed his path, sometimes listening to the subtle signals and sometimes getting some of the bigger signals. And I'm very happy, and it's my pleasure to have Dr. John Arnaldi with me today. John is a life coach in Tampa, Florida. His specialties are sexuality and intimacy. And John has helped hundreds of people to improve their relationships and recover from depression and addictions. He believes that to find joy and satisfaction in life, we must get to know our shadow, that part that we're not used to looking at, the parts of ourselves that we have avoided, disowned, or lost. And he uses expressive movement, meditation, and ancient sacred stories to help integrate the body, mind, and soul. Welcome, John.
Good to be here, Michael. I know one of your dreams for a long time has been to be on the air.
Yeah.
And, so I feel really honored to be able to share this time with you and with your listeners.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's certainly my pleasure and my honor. So, yay!
All right.
We're here. We're doing it. You know, something that we talked about some time ago. It's like, oh, okay, wow. Under the lucky happenstance and generosity and kindness of our wonderful, fantastic executive producer, Anne Marie Lavesser, who's here with us, putting the show together. She's the reason that this is happening. I'm so grateful to her. Thank you. Let me just read a little bit more, John. You've worked as an educator. I know you taught at USF as an associate professor for a while, counselor and consultant for 39 years. You have a doctorate in counselor education. You've taught ethics and counseling. You serve on the board of several professional associations. You're the past president of the Florida Mental Health Counselors Association. And you're currently serving on the board of directors at The Bridge, an educational nonprofit organization committed to the creation of a more life-enhancing and I think sustainable,
Yes,
is another key word for that group's society, life-enhancing and sustainable.
yes.
Yeah, and you conduct workshops in the area and life coaching, private life coaching sessions. Okay. Well, that's quite a resume.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I know that you've done also a lot of personal work. You and I were privileged to be a part of the men's mythopoetic movement and participated in some of those groups, weekend groups with Robert Bly and Martine Prechtel and Roger Moore. Is that another name that rings a bell? But a number of really significant, wonderful men. And I remember a weekend that we were at where Robert Bly told a story for a whole weekend.
Yes.
What an amazing experience that was.
That was a Russian folk tale.
Okay. Okay. So I know that one of the areas that you're really interested in is the significance of myth and folktale for modern life. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean by that?
Sure. One of the traits of human beings from, I think, the beginning of our existence has been passing on information and wisdom through stories. And long before there was an internet, we had stories. We had stories before we had books.
Turn it just a little. I'm so sorry. No, the other way. There you go.
There we go.
Letters.
There we go.
It's good to be heard. So, this is an ancient piece of being a human being, which is about how do we communicate our wisdom and our culture to our contemporaries as well as to future generations. And there's technology of storytelling that doesn't require, our modern technology, obviously, but it has an ability to penetrate deep into our psyche. And there are many different levels that stories affect us. But on one level, it's about our personal existence. On another level, it's this cultural or even archetypal existence. And that's like a template, I guess, would be one way of talking about it, that there are certain structures of life and of what it means to be human. And most of us as individuals don't have a lot of insight into that. But again, from the beginning of human history, people have been struggling with how do we find what the basic structure of life is about, and how do we fit our own story, our own personal story, and our personal history into this bigger context. And so myth and fairy tales are one of the ways of doing that.
Okay. So when you speak about technology, the technology of storytelling, are you talking about a particular way you tell a story, or are you talking about the layering of how this works? What do you mean by the technology of storytelling?
I guess more in terms of the symbols, that every aspect of the story is a symbol, which is another way of saying it's a window or doorway that allows us access to things, to knowledge, to wisdom that we wouldn't ordinarily have access to.
So a symbol is like the way that I understand it, it's like a container that you look at it. It looks like one thing, but when you open it up, it has bigger meanings for you that you can relate to or resonate with, that you might hear in a story. And then when you come into the story, you recognize that symbol as being pertinent to what's going on in your life in some way.
Right. And oftentimes we can open up areas of consciousness to the story in a way that if we were trying to talk about our own life, we would have difficulty. We wouldn't be able to find the words. We would run into some of the defenses and blocks and projections, and things would interfere with our ability to really get at the core truth. But through the symbols in the story, it's like living vicariously through a character, as we do when we go to a movie or whatever. Kind of the same idea, except this goes deeper.
Okay. And so how do we benefit from that when we go deeper and we're identifying with parts of the story? What kinds of things can happen for us that are beneficial?
Well, we get to know ourselves better. We get to understand our motivations. We get to understand what our soul is trying to communicate to us. One of the big problems in modern life, and partly because of the mechanical technology that surrounds every aspect of modern life, it's not organic. It's not organically based, and it's not soul based. So the big problem with modern humans is that we've lost touch with the organic realities of the world. And through these ancient stories, that helps us connect more with this organic reality, with the things that unify all aspects of human consciousness. And
like what kinds of things?
Well, like
archetypal or
yeah, ideas? Again, on many levels, but one level is archetypical in terms of how do we deal with suffering? How do we deal with failure? How do we deal with shame? Those are universal things that are going to happen to us. We're going to We're going to have betrayals in our relationships. We're going to have disappointments and failures.
So the characters in the stories are going through this, and we get to see their model of how they deal with it and how they overcome these trials. And eventually, we also have the model of being victorious over and remaining whole in some ways.
Right.
The purpose of the story, the healing purpose of the story, is some of the way that I understand it is that offers us some of that model.
Yes, and again, it's happening on several levels. So on one level, it's kind of simply an informational level.
It's practical, right?
It's practical. But then there's also the deeper level of so much of what happens internally, like if you want to use the words in our soul, at our very core, the very depths of our psyche, a lot of that stuff is pre-verbal or non-verbal.
Right.
There's experiences and dynamics and processes that really don't fit cognitive understanding.
So that's images, right? You're talking about the imaginal world.
Yes.
Right. Well, how come a movie like an animation movie of these stories isn't the same thing as hearing the story?
Well, it can be.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are many ways that images offer those symbols and offer that access to this other world, basically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's like a portal.
Right.
And it doesn't matter what the image is. I mean, it could be animation, it could be a regular movie with actors and actors,
But is there a difference in receiving the image by a movie and creating the image that's coming out of a verbal experience, like a storytelling, where I have to create what that hero or heroine looks like?
Yes.
I have to create all of those elements in the story.
Yes.
Rather than having them just sort of coming over me. I don't interact with that. I think there's a deeper level that comes from hearing a story than there is from seeing the story portrayed on a screen and having it delivered to me. Whereas the other sense is I have to engage those aspects of my mind that I think bring us to a deeper place by hearing a story.
Yes. I definitely agree with you.
Okay.
Yeah, because what's happening when we hear a story is it's stimulating the symbols within ourself, our own individual symbols and our own individual story. And so the images that get generated in our mind match our own experience and then become a bridge to this archetypical symbol in the story.
Right. So the symbol, the story carries the symbol, and then we project our own personal experiences onto that story. Okay. Well, we're talking a lot about stories. So poems are a way of telling a story in an abbreviated way. It's a very concise kind of image packaging, if you will. I'm wondering if you would read one of your poems that you brought with you at this point.
I'd be happy to.
Okay, great.
This is a poem that I wrote in 2012 on the night before my divorce. On the day of my divorce, against all odds, I have found my way home in silence. I have found my way to some deep place under the roots of a great tree. Hidden here in the mud, not a single word remains to distract me. I am a root hair, one cell thick. I do only that which I was designed to do. I drink unashamed from the river.
I do only that thing which I am designed to do.
Which is to drink from the river of life.
Drink from the river of life. And that's so much about what DayQuest Life, the idea of DayQuest Life is about. And I'm really so happy you drank. You drank from the river, and then you brought that poem.
Yes.
Because it really so fits the idea of being in tune. And in that poem, you're talking about like getting into this place of really where everything has been stripped away through this very painful
Yes.
life process. Everything that you knew previously, almost everything, was being stripped away so that you were down to the bare trees, down to the bare single cell root.
Right. As nitty gritty as you can get, in the mud.
In the mud.
And beyond words.
Yeah, yeah. And with no distractions.
Right. There's nothing left. Yeah.
Yeah, what a moment.
Yes. And we fight that. We resist that. I mean, nobody wants to feel that level of suffering.
Right.
I mean, I don't.
No.
And none of us volunteer for that.
Right.
And yet life over and over again confronts us with intense suffering. And our culture really often fails us in providing us with a way of somehow surviving and making sense and moving forward with our life. A lot of us end up being very stuck in the wounding.
Right, right. And in that poem, you said this was written the night before the official divorce proceedings. So obviously you had gone through a lot of process of separation and realizing of and grief. This was part of the grieving process. And it sounds like in this poem, you were in that flow, in that moving forward already, because you were ready to drink unashamedly from the river.
Yes.
Naked.
Yes.
Unashamedly. That's such a powerful image. And it sounds so strong at that point.
Yes.
Right?
And it was hopeful.
Yeah.
And still is hopeful to me that again, in this place of suffering, in this place of emptiness, and even just icky mud, whatever the different images are there,
Right.
beyond words, beyond our cognitive understanding, beyond ego, and also beyond shame, that there's this very core experience of what it means to drink the water of life, drink from the river of life.
And really resonates with Angelus Ariane's instruction to speak your truth without blame or judgment, to stand without shame and drink from the river of life. Yeah. And I know that you had told me that this was a really deep process where you had like an experience of like dancing with Kali the Destroyer almost, right? Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because that sort of preceded this, I think, or was right around the same time, or
kind of about, well, actually it preceded it.
So it's about the way,
that whole year.
That story is about how you dealt with or found a way to deal with this intense pain of having everything stripped away and trying to find out the core of who you were.
Yes.
And that's our quest.
Yes.
I think that's what we do daily. That's the day quest is stepping into that direction every day, making an intention to do that.
Yes.
So what kinds of things did you find along the way?
Well, some of it was going back to things that had helped me in the past, and also just to kind of give a little bit of context here, it was a big enough difficult situation to just say the divorce, but it was bigger than that. It was more than that. I was really at a crossroads in my life and feeling very lost and that period of actually several years before the divorce. But at any rate, I started trying to find where is the life energy? Where is the juice of life? Where's my soul calling me? And things just seemed to get bleaker and bleaker and bleaker until there was almost nothing there. But some of the things that kept speaking to me were about movement and something about trying to get better in touch with my body and my breathing and my sexuality. And so one of the things I started doing was experimenting with ecstatic dance and expressive movement, which I had done a little bit with 15 or 20 years before.
Dancing around the fire.
Yeah, there you go.
The sweat lodge. Yeah, I remember that.
You remember?
Yeah. Let me just say I'm here with my guest John Arnaldi, and this is the DayQuest Life radio show, and we're on WSPF-DB. This is rhinoonair.com. And John is a life coach in Tampa, Florida, and he specializes in sexuality and intimacy, and does workshops through movement and expressive movement. And we're about to talk some more about what that is and how that works, and those kinds of things. So you had a sense that you had to get into your body.
Yes.
You were out of touch somehow.
My head wasn't giving me the answers that seemed to matter.
Oh, okay.
I'm intelligent. I'm academically trained. I'm very cognitive in my approach to life, but none of that was working anymore. It was like I'm lost.
You were following Descartes a little too closely, right?
Yeah,
I think, therefore I am, and if there's nothing else down below, right?
Right, exactly.
Okay.
And that's the dilemma of modern.
It is the dilemma of modern beings.
We've developed our head, and we kind of cut off at the neck.
And boy, that thing can sure be very busy up there and quite inaccurate.
Yes. Yes.
Most of the time.
It's very hard to detect what part is virtual reality and fantasy versus what has some grounding in reality.
Okay.
And again, that's part of what our body can provide to us.
Right.
If we're in touch with our body, it's in touch with a whole physical reality that our brain really on its own, or at least cognitively, really is not very aware of.
And let me just interject that is one of the main practices of mindfulness. When you do a mindfulness practice, one of the main practices is something called a body scan, where you sit in your protected, when I say protected space, I mean just the space that you decide at the time and that it's going to be quiet, where you're just going to do this practice so that nothing else is going to distract you very much. And for 20 minutes, you scan your body from top to bottom and getting very in touch and giving those places an opportunity to speak and an opportunity to somehow listen without getting attached to it, but to somehow come. So you can imagine how you can come to know very subtly the intricacies of what the body might be saying in that kind of a situation. It's not a cognitive process.
No.
It really isn't. You use your mind and you direct the mind to do this activity. But as part of mindfulness, if thoughts come in, when they come in, they are there and then released very gently, non-judgmentally, and then you bring yourself back to the focal point. So it's not about being mindless or thoughtless. It's about paying attention to a particular thing, and that's one of the benefits I think that people get out of mindfulness practice is being more in touch with being present. The whole idea of mindfulness is being present.
Exactly.
And you're talking about another way of getting in touch with the body and being present through expressive movement and dance.
Yes. And for me, because I had practiced silent meditation for many, many years, and my religious affiliation for a big part of my adult life was Quaker, and so our worship practice was silence, silent meditation. But as things became more stressful in my life, I really had a hard time turning off the noise in my head and getting focused on just being present with my whole self that included my body. And also some way to accommodate to the stress and pain that my body was experiencing, and
allowing whatever is
to
existing
be open,
to be there,
to witness what's there,
and somehow finding a way to be tolerant of that, so that you're not reaching for a distraction, not pushing it away, not burying yourself in the mud, as the poem says. To avoid.
Yes. So I found through expressive dance a way of allowing my body to speak to me through movement, through nonverbal means, and this isn't like something you do once and you learn your lesson, you get, you go write in your journal, oh, okay, well, today I learned this and now everything's fine. It's a process. It's a process of exploring and discovering.
So if you went to a workshop for a weekend, you would sort of strike the spark, get the kindling going, and then that fire, that particular issue keeps feeding you, keeps burning in a sense.
Yes.
Okay. Following Carl Jung's prerogative to let it burn.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Or another way of looking at it, I often say this at the beginning of workshops, is, my real goal is to offer people an opportunity to open some doors and windows and see a little bit, witness a little bit into yourself of what you normally don't have access to. And once you start learning that process, which again is kind of like with mindfulness, when you learn to be present to yourself and you learn to let go of judgments, you start discovering stuff and you learn what that process is, so you can keep doing it and you keep learning more and more and more. And you get more, again, of that truth of what your soul is really about.
So what does a workshop look like? What would, if somebody who's listening or watching on YouTube was interested in coming to a workshop? I know that sometimes you just have to be there to experience it.
Right.
But what, you have one coming up, John, let me see. You've got one coming up on the September 19th here in Tampa.
Right.
We can get into some more of the details on that in a minute. Internal Landscapes and Shadow Stories with John Olam. But tell